Well, welcome to part 3 of the Chrispiration conversation, talking about the Magi, or the wise men, or wise women, wise people. Let's go with wise people, shall we? So, could you just say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nigel.
Hi, I'm Kari.
And I'm Darren.
So, we're just going to discuss what inspires us about the wise men. Kari, I thought you would like to kick us off with a thought.
I think what I found interesting about the wise men when you look at it, and I don't think that we focus on this a lot, but I think the fact that they were from the East, i.e. they weren't anything to do with the Jewish nation and the Jewish religion, and I just think it's interesting how critical they are to the Christmas story. They're critical in terms of Herod sort of saying, okay, there's this Messiah who's been born, maybe I should be worried about this. But, and God uses somebody who just really is, what we would consider a non-Christian, really, I would say. And I think that that's really interesting. And I think it says so much about the fact that God is here for everybody. Jesus is here for everybody. I think sometimes we're quite good at putting God in a bit of a box. And I think that when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how even theology can kind of put God in a bit of a box, and what we believe we understand about him we get from the Bible, which is obviously important, but there's a lot that I think we just don't understand or we don't know about God because of the amazing majesty of all-knowingness of God. And I was thinking about it in terms of films, and I don't know if anybody has ever watched the film Interstellar, but it's a massive film in our house because we're people quite into astrophysics in our house. So in the film Interstellar, there's this journey through space and time, and they're trying to find a solution for the kind of what's going on in the world. And at one point, one of the characters goes through a wormhole, and what happens at that point is that you see the entire film in a different perspective. So everything that has happened up to that point in the film, you thought you were seeing from one point of view. And at the point when the character goes through this wormhole, you suddenly see the entire bit of the film you've already watched in a completely different perspective, because you're seeing it from the perspective of this character and how that has affected the rest of the film, everything that's happened up to that point, all these messages that have been being received, you see that. And it made me think about how I think God is like that. I think we see and understand such a small portion of what God is actually like and the reality of God in his godness. And I think sometimes that makes our view of the world and the people that we come into contact with, we just don't understand everything that God is doing. And I think that's what I really enjoyed about re-looking at the Magi, and in the thinking God used these people who were from the East, and he brought them, and they played such a critical role in Jesus' story. And then knowing that they shouldn't go back to Herod, and being warned in a dream, like God spoke to them through that dream. And I think we need to be really careful to not say that these people aren't of God, or that God can't speak to people who aren't Christian, or that God can't use people of all different types to convey his message, or to say something to us, to speak into our lives in a way that he wants us to hear. And that's what it said to me.
So I remember someone saying once, it's almost like if the Nativity had been written by a human being, that might be a bit with the Magi that someone would say, you've got that bit wrong. That's not what God would do. That sounds like what you're kind of just saying in a nutshell. Yeah. God flips everything on his head, doesn't it? Yeah. Any other thoughts from either of you about that?
Yeah, I do. You'll have to excuse the pronunciation of this, but it's believed by some that the wise men were actually Zoroastrians, which is a Persian religion that was founded in 6th century BC, slightly similar towards as a Christian faith, i.e. there was one supreme God, and by all good deeds this supreme God could defeat the evil spirit. So I found that quite interesting from that point of view as well, that very early on God's kind of setting his stall out that you don't have to be following a set religion for him to be able to give you access to Jesus. So yeah, I will wholeheartedly go with that one, Kari.
Yeah. And it's interesting, it feeds into this kind of mentality that some Christians have of there's us lot, we're the good guys, and them lot are the, let's go with the others politely. And that's doesn't feel like that's God's attitude in this.
Yeah, I think that doesn't seem like it's, and I think that is a way of us thinking, instead of being so narrow in our vision of how does God operate, what does God look like, what is the way that God reveals himself, we sometimes need to be a lot more open than I think that we actually are. I remember when I was in university and there was somebody on the bus, I was chatting to this person, it's like that. Well, I'm the type of person who will talk to somebody on the bus and then talk to the same person because I see them on the bus. And this person said something to me, and I remember really clearly thinking, oh my gosh, that person, I knew they were not a Christian, but I felt very clearly that they had just spoken something to me that God wanted me to hear. And I think that that's just the reality, that sometimes we can get a bit fixed, and sometimes we need to widen ourselves up to what God is actually doing.
Yeah, we've seen that in other parts of the Bible, though. I think it was the Chaldeans. God used the Chaldeans to, I don't know if I've got the pronunciation right, but God does use a whole range of people in the Bible who are don't have a strong Jewish faith or whatever. So yeah, we shouldn't be surprised. But we are, but we shouldn't be.
Yeah. And I think the thing that weirds me out the most about all of this is they reference, one of you mentioned, they referenced the prophet Micah, so they knew of the Old Testament, and that's good. But they also see this sign in the stars. They were astrologers. Now, if someone comes to me and says, should I do astrology? I would say, no, that's really bad. Don't do that. We see that in the book of Daniel, where there's Daniel and all these astrologers, Magi, if you like, and Daniel says to the king, don't listen to them. It's God. God is the one who guides us. And it weirds me out a little bit, but in a quite a good way, I think, that God uses something that we and he would say is wrong, but he still uses it to draw people to him, which is amazing, isn't it? Really amazing, the creativity of God.
Yeah, I thought the same thing when I read it. I thought, that's the type of person we would be like going, oh no, spiritually, that's not really what you should be doing. You shouldn't really be consulting the stars. And yet they're used in the story of Jesus' birth to celebrate the Messiah, to point the way to the Messiah. Yeah. And it's such a strong point of that, the story. And it's just really interesting. It's God using the other in a way that says, I'm here for everybody. Yeah.
It just amazes me the way that I think sometimes we so limit God in our minds in the way we think he ought to work, and it's just wonderful to be reminded that people who we think are far from God are actually near to him. And one of the things I found over the years as I talk to people on buses or wherever I am is that there's a whole load of people out there who aren't Christians but actually are really spiritual and are seeking something profound, and that just really, when I think of the Magi, I think of that. Great start. Again, Nigel, do you want to give us any thoughts?
So what impresses me about the wise men, and by the way, we don't know there were three, we're only supposing there were three because of the three gifts, so that there could have been more or less, we don't really know, is that they, as you said, they knew the prophecy of Micah. So they knew that, but that happened 400 years or something like 400 years beforehand. So they got the faith to pick up a prophecy from 400 odd years ago, to recognise this star, and that this is the time when the Messiah is going to be born. And then if they were coming from Persia or modern day Iran, to basically say, okay, yeah, we're going to travel. It's probably, Google says it's 18 days on a bicycle to buy from Tehran to Jerusalem. So they had
It must be true then.
yeah. So they had the faith,
Yeah.
and they relied on their knowledge to make that effectively 1 month journey to Jerusalem to find the Messiah. That's a pretty big thing, isn't it?
Amazing, yeah, got amazing faith. Yeah, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do as well. I was thinking this morning, I don't think I'm going to be in line with anything anybody else has said, but as per usual, God knows better than I do. I did some research into the wise men and so on and so forth, because we get the whole three. There's 3 gifts, so there's probably 3 wise men, but it turns out that the Magi would have been travelling with servants, soldiers and beasts of burden to carry all their kit. So one of the numbers that a group of scholars have thrown around is their little entourage could have been as many as 800 to 1,000 people, which is a few more than just 3.
I like your mathematic ability. Carry on.
And that sort of blew my mind a little bit, because we do, over the years doing the Nativity, I've played, apart from the major role of Mary, I must have played every role. I've been the donkey, I've been a little drummer boy, I've been Joseph, shepherds and all that other stuff. And what sort of blows me away is when you look at it, the wise men didn't turn up at Bethlehem. And I thought, hey, they've got this as a great story here. No wonder they're wise. Guys not wanting to ask directions, it turned up when Jesus was 2 somewhere else, which I find quite incredible. But the fact that Jesus was 2, approximately, so the scholars, I've read scholars a lot later than last week, so scholars seem to agree that Jesus would have been about 2. So I just wondered, and I didn't find it out, whether there was any, because it seemed those gifts seem to be a bit strange to give to a child. Is there any significance of giving gifts like those to a 2-year-old?
Well, I think we've all probably done a bit of research this week. So when I was looking at it, those gifts during that time period, as far as I could find, would traditionally have been given to somebody in a king role. So they brought those gifts to signify his kingship. But then also there seems to be some underlying meanings to some of the gifts. So the gold would have been king, the frankincense maybe was to do with godliness or holiness, and then the myrrh to do with associated with death. Yeah. So obviously that then ties in with Jesus' life and death, doesn't it?
I just thought it was cool.
I thought the 2-year-old thing was interesting as well, because we actually did about Jesus' birth in kids' church last week, and I had all the nativity characters, and they had to go and find them all and get them all and put them in the nativity. But they brought the wise men, and I was like, would the wise men have been here? And it was quite interesting, because actually none of them knew that the wise men wouldn't have been there. And that it was that they actually came when he was about 2, or that they would have been settled in a house, the scriptures show at that point. So it's quite interesting how the story has changed as culturally people have adapted it, and it's convenient to have the wise men in a nativity at the time of Jesus' birth, isn't it? Rather than waiting 2 years for him to turn up,
Absolutely. It's like a film adaptation of a book, isn't it? Where they squeeze everything into one thing. But yeah, it's challenging though, isn't it? How, as people who'd want to pride ourselves as being quite biblical, at Christmas we go full on unbiblical, and we start singing about silent nights. And I've been to a birth or 2 in my time. There's nothing silent about it, is there? But sorry, Nigel, bring us back down to earth now. Here we go.
I was just going to comment that the only reason we suppose Jesus was around 2 is that in the subsequent passage where it says that basically when Herod found they'd done a runner, and he basically went round and got all the children under 2, he ordered them killed in Bethlehem, didn't he? So that's why we know Jesus was some age between 0 and 2, so that's why we suppose it was about 2.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it's wonderful. And I just think Mary and Joseph, and I think you've explained the gifts and their symbolism really well, but I wonder how much Mary and Joseph understood that. They must have been scratching their heads thinking, well, who are these people? And, well, thank you for the gold. I'll have a bit of that. But it must have been strange.
And I suppose it must have been helpful for when they had to go to Egypt to escape what happened, that potentially they might have been able to use, I mean, we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that, but maybe they could have used those gifts to help them with that. Who knows?
Yeah.
So God was equipping them, if that potentially was what they need. You know, they did need to do that to escape.
Yeah. And it's interesting in the sense of, last week we talked about Jesus being swaddled and wrapped, and then he was wrapped at the end of, well, not at the end, because it wasn't the end, sorry for the spoiler. He came back to life, they wrapped him in the tomb. And it's the same with the myrrh, isn't it? They anointed him with myrrh, and that myrrh was something given to him. And it's a strange thing to give to a child, something that it was like this rare perfume that was associated with death, an odd thing to give to a child. And I wonder if Mary at the cross remembered that. Yeah. Darren, we've not come to you yet. What inspires you? What's the thing you wanted to bring to us that inspires you about the Magi?
Already done.
Oh, you've done it?
Just purely because the stuff that Kari and Nigel brought, I kind of had similar thoughts as well, which I'm like, ooh, in good company. So yeah, I don't really have a great deal to add. Bit of controversy, I could add that there are some scholars that believe that the 3 wise men, one of them may well have been a woman, dun dun dun, but I wasn't going to pull at that thread, not on a Sunday morning here. So yeah, it's, I think with all research, you kind of got to be careful to stick to the original script. And
is that God's script or the Nativity script?
The God's script.
Okay.
And to, research and find, because God never told anybody to be daft and kind of do their own research and whatnot. But I think there does come a point whereby you have to go back to the original script and go, okay, what did God say? What does the Bible describe this as? And anything that kind of falls in line with that is probably God breathed, and anything that is completely outside that, very divisive, chances are it might not be.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And it's interesting that this word Magi, and it does. You would the assumption, having read the word, is it's male. That's in the language. But we know if you want to know what a Magi is, you read the book of Daniel and you see these kind of wise men, and they're guiding the king. Now, what we know from ancient history is they were exclusively male, so they could very well have been female. Perhaps they weren't, but they were probably predominantly male. But we don't know, and the Bible's a bit vague on that. But nevertheless, they would have come in. They would have been people who were really important and regal there in their finery. And the first thing they do is they bow down to this baby. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. If you're sat in a house with a 2-year-old or under, and these people come in all their finery and physically bow down, prostrate themselves before this child, what's that? What?
But I think that's a natural reaction, because they understood the prophecy that this was the Messiah.
Yeah. And
they travelled a month, to do that. So that doesn't surprise me. So it's impressive, but it doesn't surprise me, given that the journey they embarked upon and what they did, what they had to go through to get there. And they must have been looking at the stars and doing that for some time. That's remember 400 years after the original prophecy. That's pretty impressive that God spoke to them and they saw the signs and were obedient and had faith.
Good.
Also, something to remember is they would have had day jobs. So the day jobs would have been the royal advisors themselves.
Yeah.
So they didn't suddenly just take a degree, become wise men, and this was their only thing that they ever did. They would have worked for some royal dignitary, so they would have known the protocol behind acknowledging and welcoming somebody of a high standard.
I'd No, I don't hold that thought. It's going to be good. But you know, I've never thought of that before. This sense of these people who, that's how you treat royalty, and that would have been to them and you can imagine them flat on the floor. There's not even isn't he a bit cute? Oh, I'm supposed to be bowing down. This is a holy, regal moment. That's really profound. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say that I think from Joseph and Mary's point of view, it probably would have actually been quite shocking, despite everything that they would have experienced prior to that. Obviously, they've had been visited by angels and had shepherds come along and all sorts of things that would have been out of the ordinary. But I still think having these people who would have been foreign, that they wouldn't have, they would be dressed in a different way, they would, look different than them, having them come into their house, which probably would have been just a really ordinary dwelling. You don't get the sense that Mary and Joseph were rich in any sense. He was a carpenter. Coming to their house and prostrating them, that would have been, I think, really shocking for them.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't have been shocking for the Magi because they knew that's what they had to do. But I think it would have been really shocking for Mary and Joseph. And also Jesus being presented with these gifts, which would have been probably astronomical value, would have just been, okay, what is real? We know that this is the Son of God, but this is like, yeah.
Wonderful.
And also you've got to think, did the wise men have translators with them? Because again, according to the research, they were from Persia, Arabia or Ethiopia and India. So would there have been translators also involved with this, which would have added to the whole spectacle of what was going on? And then you bear in mind that if there was 800 to 1,000 of these people in their beasts and all of that, were there other wise men within that group that had travelled as well? Different areas of expertise and so on and so forth. So it wasn't just kind of the three wise men, wise people churning up at the house. There would have been an entire entourage rocking up, which they would have seen for quite a way off. So how much have they started to panic? Like, hang on a minute, we've been told to run and this is now going on. What state mentally could they have been in before this party arrived?
It's amazing thinking about how multinational, as you just said, the whole thing is. And you think of God's creation of the world happening in Israel, so you think it's a very Jewish event. But it's interesting, as you say, that whole idea of people from across different parts of the world. And I came across something on Facebook this week. This is a nativity scene with only the white people left. That's what it was. And it was just blank. Because again, we think from our British, perhaps white perspective, that's what people of power and importance looks like. And you go to this point where God comes into the world and he's surrounded by all these people from different ethnic backgrounds and different parts of the world, people who Christians and Jews would have thought were the wrong sort. And God says, they're the people I want in. Wonderful, isn't it? Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. That's been excellent, hasn't it? Should we give them a round of applause?